Alright guys, welcome back. Back here at MT Performance Engines with Matt Trevina, and this is going to be part 5 of his 800 horsepower setup, and we're going to have a bit of a change of pace today. We're actually going to be putting it together. Up until this point, all we've really done is talk about it and go through all the real cool parts, but now Matt's got the parts laid out. He's going to do a quick run through of what he's got, and then we're going to get straight into it and start building. So, what have you got, man?
Alright, so in the last part, we were in my old shed back at my old house. Since then, you would have seen that I've bought a house near Nico down here in Wollongong. I've built a beautiful shed for myself, which I can work out of, and it's clean and it's got enough space. And that's sort of what I wanted for a long time. So sort of everything leading up to that, buying the house, building the shed. Now I've got the space. Now I can actually, get stuck into this project. So you would have seen in the last video that Nico's going to put up, we just pulled the Corolla off the dyno. So that's the old engine setup that we were saying was going to make, what was it, 400 horsepower-ish?
So we were planning for 400,
yeah.
But because of you think it was because of your valves and just a few upgrades and cams and all that?
Yeah, we changed a lot. We went to M-Tron ECU, put a heap of sensors in it. There was a lot changed. We ended up changing the intake manifold over to a World Speed. Adam at World Speed worked with me, and we built a new manifold for the 20 valve 4A, which is a single throttle body, all billet. We went from a billet atomizer back to a injector dynamics injector. We've done a lot of work on that car. We've just pulled it off the dyno, and as you would have seen in that video, we end up making about 505 horsepower at the tyre at 21.7 pounds of boost. So pretty reasonable, respectable power for that engine package. We maxed the injectors out, so we didn't push that any harder. We're about 95% duty cycle, which is a bit too much for my liking. So probably never going to run that 500 horsepower. It's probably only going to run maybe 470, just to try and keep a bit of space on the injectors for us. But on the dyno, we actually tried to do flat shift testing on the hub dyno, and that's a big no-no, and we just done it anyway, and it locked the gearbox up. So you wouldn't have seen it on camera, but since the last video, I've actually pulled the gearbox out, confirmed that it's all okay. The shifter just locked it out, so I've just put it all back together. The car's running. We'll show you a bit of that. I guess we'll do like a recap video of that setup.
Yeah, once we finish here.
Once we finish up.
But yeah, so with that car, this setup is the setup in the car is going to stay relatively similar. We're just going to have a different manifold for the turbo and
bigger turbo
in the different intake manifold, and you're just going to do the old swap out.
Yeah.
But the drivetrain, it's all set up.
The drivetrain's set, so it's got a 4.9-inch diff and a Jericho NASCAR gearbox in it. Direct twin clutch. It's got all the components there to handle the horsepower of this setup. So this was going to be our, we're going to say 800 horsepower, but we said last engine was going to be 400, and ended up making 500, so it's like another 25% more. So the baseline target for this has to be 800. Let's see where that goes. But we'll give you a rundown of what we've got here. So today we're only going to be assembling short rotors, short rotating assembly. So it's crank rods and pistons. Get it rotating in the block because I still have to send some parts off for polishing, my camshafts and oil pump gears. I'm going to set a billet toe to oil pump gears in this one, and the Kelford cams, which are the same cam profile that I run in the car now. The only difference between the two engine setups really is the strength of this one is far superior to the last one. That's a 12-year-old engine I built when I was an apprentice. This has now got 12 years of development and learning involved in it, so this one's going to be substantially stronger.
Standard bore too, standard bore slides.
Yeah, so this one is basically a standard bore 5 thou over with a custom piston here that we've actually only gone 5 thou over with. So the nominal size is 81 mil factory bore. Normally you can buy half mil increments, so your half mil, 81.5 and 82. I try not to go 82 mil because you start losing a bit of the bore strength.
Yep.
This block was in such good shape that I only managed to hone out about 5 thou before all the damage was essentially gone. So I got Nito to work with me. We made a custom piston that was 5 thou oversized. Using a standard size ring on a 5 thou over has given us the perfect ring gap essentially, just to not even have to file finish them. They're bang on. So really good that we can just essentially put this thing together with the components that I know, tested and true. We'll just run you through the parts. I guess I've got a set of Argo rods here. We would have seen these in the videos, in the last videos before. So we've got the Argo steel con rods, ARP bolts. We've got a factory OEM brand new crankshaft and polished that up. ARP main bolts, or studs rather. King Racing bearings. So these have got like a coating on them. Can't remember the coating they call it.
It's not DLC, is it?
No, it's not DLC. It's like it's their own proprietary material.
Okay. Yeah.
And yeah, there's a mounted of parts over here which will be going into the engine as it goes out. Some people like laying all their parts out on their bench as they assemble engines. I only tend to lay out the parts that I'm actually using in that point.
Yeah.
So when I assemble an engine, at this point, crank rods and pistons on the bench. Once those go into the engine, then I move the new parts across, clean those, prep those, and then install them, and then move my way up the engine as I assemble. Yeah.
Before I came, you also gapped the rings?
Yeah, so we checked the gap. Didn't have to gap any because, like I say, it's a standard ball plus 5 thou, and we use a standard ring set. So the way it works is the rings are obviously tight on a factory ball, but because we've increased the ball size 5 thou, it's opened up the gap for us, so we didn't even have to gap them, so they're perfect. I've checked them.
Yep.
They have been checked, don't worry, that's all sorted.
Yeah, just for anyone that doesn't know, turbo or nitrous, you want a larger gap?
Yes,
so
yes,
so they don't pinch.
High boost, turbo, nitrous, anything that adds extra heat into the engine, so obviously more power, generating more power in the engine creates more heat. The rings hop that, so the ring gets hot, and as it gets hotter, it expands, and that's why you have a gap there, because you don't want them to touch, because eventually if they touch, they get too tight, press against each other, and it tears the crown of the piston off. It'll actually tear, if your ring gaps actually touch and get too big, it actually tears this whole top section of the piston off from your ring. So you don't want that. So you essentially try and run the gap as small as possible to the point where it won't pinch up, but you run it large enough that you can still put more power and heat into it. So yeah, that's the theory behind the rings.
Very, very nice, man. Let's get into it.
Yeah,
let's get this thing together.
So as you can see in the bottom end of this one, I've sort of had a bit of extra time. I've just sort of smoothened out any of the castings. I didn't go too crazy with that to put it in.
Oh, yeah. You come with the thrusts?
Yep, so with the thrust bearings, the side with the 2 grooves cut on it, you can see there's a alloy side and a steel side. Steel side always goes to the block, alloy side always to the crank. So 4As, you just sort of pull the crank forwards, drop that in, then you tap the crank back, get your other one, give it a wipe off any debris that's on it. I install the thrust dry because the oil, when you test for thrust, the oil takes up like a bit of like movement.
Yep.
So you want it to be dry when you test the thrust, and then once there's oil in there, it sort of acts like a sponge testing the thrust. So it's better to just do them dry and then oil up the thrust at the end. So again, alloy to the crank. Spin that in, drop it down. So as I was saying to Nick, I might just explain what I'm up to here. This engine has had the crankshaft in it and tensioned. I was checking clearances and like oil shaft clearance and thrust on an old shaft that I had that I ended up giving to a mate of mine because he needed one. So I just got a new shaft. But I had this together and it was all dirt. Like I consider it dirty now. Although this is all brand new grease and it's somewhat clean, I still consider it dirty. So I'm just going to go back through, clean all the studs off, re-grease everything and assemble it because it's sort of been together but apart, if that makes sense. Yeah. So
even if it just accumulates off like when it's outside the car,
like
dust or something.
Yeah, mind you, I bag up all my engines, so there's very little chance of dust and stuff getting in. But it's always just good practice to you're here, just clean it and go again. So I'm just gonna fresh ARP grease, mix it all up, and then clean all the caps off. Like that's just come out of the engine, so it's clean, but like I just consider that dirty. So I'll just clean all this off again and redo it. So it's like Kitty's finger paints here, guys. As you can see, I've done my standard thing where I mix up the ARP grease out of the tube. You'll find once it goes to this sort of matte color, that's when it's actually completely mixed. When it's in the tube for a long period of time and you extract it out, you'll find that it's like heavy graphite and then like an oil, and it separates as it sits there. So before it comes out, what I do when it's in the packet, if it's not already opened, I'll sort of massage the packet until you sort of mix as much as you can inside, open it, smear it out on the table, and then mix it. And you'll see the change in the color. Once it goes to this like matte finish, that's when the grease is the way that it should be when you actually go to tension it down. If you don't do that, you just won't reach the torque that it's actually required to to be accurate. So ARP recommend that you use their grease because it's tested with their torque equipment to their standards. So if they're telling you you want 60 pounds of resistance on the tension wrench, because that's all the tension wrench is doing, it's measuring the resistance that the friction is giving you. So if you do no oil and do 60 pounds, and then actually mark the angle of your tension wrench, undo it and put grease on and actually do it again, you'll find that you've actually pulled it down harder, which means you've stretched the stud more, which means you have more clamping force for the same tension. So use their grease, mix it correctly, and always work to their standards, because that's how they've tested this stuff. That's how they work it out. So yeah, just a little bit of advice there, building engines. Got my snap-on tension wrench out, thanks to Nico. Thanks for the present, bro. I've retired the old Repco bar. It's done a lot of engines, that one. Oh, it was starting to get to the point where I had to undo it. Oh, there you go. That's all done now, so what we'll do is we'll just check the spin, and then we'll check the thrust. Spin's nice and easy. No effort in that whatsoever. Crankshaft's nice and straight. Spins like a top. So we've just set the thrust. I went through about 3 sets of different thrust bearings that I had. I had ACL King and some old OEM ones from a 7A that I stripped recently, which will be another project in the future. I think that had maybe 120, 180,000 Ks on it. So I've used those thrusts because they had the best clearance, and realistically the thrusts don't need to be any sort of exotic material, and it's an inconsequential. So I've chucked in the OEM thrust that gave me the correct clearance. We've set the thrust, that's all set now and we're happy. So now we're moving on to rods and pistons. So just in front of us we've got the Argo rod split. I've just cleaned all the stuff that comes, like the oil that comes in them, stripped all that off. It's a really nice high quality steel. We've got the solid CP gudgeon pins. So these are the upgraded pins from what normally comes with your standard kits. These are for like high power, high boost applications. Does add a lot of weight into the top of the rod, but it's a fair trade-off considering how much power we're going to try and make. So these, normally what will happen is if you're running too thin a gudgeon pin at certain power levels, you'll actually shear the pin into 3 pieces, where it literally just, it's like a laser. It just cuts this pin into 3 slugs. When you run too much power, I've seen them come out and they're 3 pieces, and it's unbelievable how like finely sheared they are. Yeah. So you always like,
go. That rod is, even though it's a heavy duty rod, it's still pretty light. Like when you hold it, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not a heavy. It's not what I would say, like compared to like a standard 4A rod. It's much lighter.
Yeah. Well, if we compare against a factory blacktop rod,
so even blacktops are even a lighter rod. As far as like,
that's a factory blacktop rod compared to the Argo.
Yeah.
So you can see the difference, and the light and the weight. It's marginal.
When you pull out like a 16 valve rod or like a GZE rod, it'd be much heavier.
Oh yeah. I think it's they're far heavier than this. So I'm going to go tang to intake valve side. So that's the way it's going to go. Let's lube this thing up.
What did you say, tang?
Yeah, the tang in the rod bearing. I'll show you in a second.
Oh, yes, right. No.
Yeah. Yes. So there's a tang in the rod bearing. So that tang there, I'll put to the intake side of the motor, because that's where they are on the main caps. It's just a thing that I do. Normally you'll find on like a brand name rod, they'll have the brand like Nitto in here, or they'll have the brand and the brand faces forwards.
Yep.
It's just, this rod, it doesn't matter. There's no directional marks, there's no cutouts. So if you look at a blacktop 20 valve compared to this, they have a cutout here and cutout there. These cutouts are for oil. It's like an oil squirter. The oil sprays out the side of the bearing, hits the crankshaft, and then sprays upwards, and it lubricates up under the crown of the piston, as well as the oil squirters in the block. So these rods don't have that. So there's no real way to tell directional. And then the blacktop 20 valve, the cutouts are on the same side, so if you spin it the other way, it's the same anyway. So, but I mean, and then other rods again, you'll see on, so not on this rod, but on 16 valve rods, they actually have a hole here that comes through up here, and you'll actually find on the bearing there's a oil hole on it, which is funny to see an oil hole. What's that for? When the bearing's actually in the rod, the oil travels from the rod journal and it sprays out of that to lubricate the thrust side of the block, which is the intake valve side. So the blacktop 20 valve rods don't have it because they've changed the design and they put the grooves here, but the bearings still have the hole in it, but the hole's not utilised in these rod bearings or in these rods or in the blacktop 20 valve rods. But on the 16 valve rods there's a hole in it to lubricate the thrust.
Cool.
So you remember the circlip groove trick, Nick? Always run them
yes.
vertically.
Yeah, I do. So what Matt was talking about there is just to either have your circlip facing, or the gap of your circlip facing down or up. He always goes down. But if it's going sideways, it can, it can compress and then jump out. So that would be a rookie mistake if I
messed up my own.
If I'd have done that or something, you know. So.
Yeah, so the circlip groove always goes to the bottom. If it's sideways, the circlip can actually close up because as the piston's travelling up and down, the circlip can close and then jump out, and then that's pretty catastrophic to the engine. So if you run them vertically, you don't have that issue. You've got other types of circlips like Spiro locks, which are hated by most engine builders. I don't know anyone that really likes Spiro locks, which is basically a spiral bit of flat metal, and you wind it in and you screw it in, and then once it's in, they're almost impossible to remove, and they're almost impossible to get in. Guys can do them, but I very much prefer the circlip or Teflon buttons. Teflon buttons is a technique where you basically machine a Teflon button that looks like a mushroom, and it locates in the center of the gudgeon pin, slides in, and the Teflon, it's basically just looks like a mushroom, and the Teflon basically sits against the bore and goes up and down, and the two Teflon pieces don't allow the gudgeon pin to travel outside of the piston. And they're mostly used in like drag cars that get stripped down very frequently, or race engines, because you don't need to remove a circlip, and the Teflon buttons just come out, gudgeon pin comes off. You can change your pistons if the skirts collapse or if there's any issues at the track.
Never heard of that, man.
Yeah, Teflon buttons. I don't have any here.
So what holds them in? The bores?
The bore.
Oh,
the Teflon just slides up and down the bore.
Okay.
Because Teflon's like low friction, it doesn't really add any loss of horsepower. But it's very, very quick to strip apart. I don't have any photos. Maybe you can just put up a photo from online.
Yeah, I'll find something and put it up.
Show them what it looks like. But there's all sorts of different techniques. But I do prefer the circlip because they are also easy to remove. There's a circlip groove cut there, so you just put the pin in there and you just pry it out.
Yep. Very,
very easy. Okay. So I normally, when I assemble the engines, what I'll do is I'll gap the rings, and then I set the rings in the bores, and I only remove them to put them back in when it's time to actually drop the pistons into the holes. And I do that because once you gap a ring, although I didn't have to gap these rings because they had enough clearance from factory, once you gap them, if you move this ring and it's gapped for this bore and you move it across, it only takes tenths of thous to change the size, half a thou of ring gap. So if you gap a ring, try this yourself, gap a ring and then move it from that bore to that bore, and measure it, move it from that bore to that bore, and you'll actually find variance. So if you're trying to get perfect ring gap and you want to maintain that, leave the rings in the bore until you're ready to assemble. That's my process. So when I'm ready to assemble, I just pull the rings out, load them onto the piston, and then that way that ring goes in that bore, and you can't mess it up because there's other rings still in the bore. So there's little indicator marks you'll find on your rings. This one has a little N on it. Might be hard to see on camera. There might be like a little dot. Hastings used like a little dot. There's all sorts of different markings. That faces up. It's always upwards. These chrome rings, they're like a barrel on the outside. So they're probably not as directional, but it's probably the backside of the ring that actually determines the inside of the ring, rather, that determines the reason that needs to be facing up. The same with the second ring that has a little N on it. These are an oil scraper. They have a backwards cut on them. They actually scrape the oil off the bore. Not so much for piston ring sealing, more so for scraping the oil and just helping the top ring. So top ring goes in like this. Okay, so set the gaps 180 degrees apart. Oil rings don't matter. Some people are very particular with setting their oil rings, but after a certain period of time, all the rings line up. The rings are moving constantly as the engine's running, and after a period of time, the gap just lines up. So when you're starting an engine fresh, just offset them, but understand that when you pull that motor apart after a period of time, they're going to be lining up. So
that's a question I've always had. I wonder, like, I have clocked the rings before.
yeah.
And I've always wondered, like, this. I wonder if these stay still. So they do. They do.
Oh
line
yeah.
up, yeah.
Yeah, they line up. Like you'll see it more in like engines with high Ks. When I was a reconditioner, as an apprentice, you start off, doing engine teardowns and all that. So you're stripping old engines that have got substantial amount of Ks on them.
Okay.
And that's one of the things you'll find is all the rings line up.
There you go.
Every engine you pull apart. Some people are a bit funny about this when it comes to like lubricating the components assembling an engine. Oil it up, oil everything. So I oil my bearings. I don't oil the faces of the rod and the cap. I keep those completely dry and clean. But when it comes to the piston, lube the rings, lube the grooves. Don't worry about getting oil. Like, don't worry about just doing the skirt. Lube everything. Make it wet. I can assemble this engine, put it into a car, and turn it on, and within 2 seconds of that car firing up, that oil's vaporized and it's gone. So when someone says, "Oh, you can't do that because it'll burn oil," it's going to burn oil for about 2 seconds. It's not going to keep burning oil. That'll burn off. And realistically, you don't want to damage any of the components when installing them into the block. So the best thing to do is lubricate them on the way in. So what I'll do here is I just oil my hand up like this. And then I come across the block and I sort of pour it into the block as I sort of smear it around. And I just lube the hell out of that thing. And this is just going to help us stopping the piston catching the bore on the way down and pinching up. It just stops anything from getting caught on the way down. Like I said, don't worry about getting oil on places you shouldn't think it should be. When it comes to this, at the end, I'll clean all of the oil off the top and do the head gasket process. But with this, make sure it's lubed. Just lube it up. It's the same when I assemble cylinder heads. I oil the valve guides and the valve stems with engine oil. Now, traditionally, when the engine is running, there's no oil there. The metal is self-lubricating, but the valve stems do need to be oiled on assembly because they sit around for a long time before they get fired up. Unless the engine is literally going in the car the same day, even still, I would still lube it. And that oil will burn off in milliseconds after the engine starts for the first time. So it'll burn the oil off, and then after that it's self-lubricating. Yep. So just a bit of advice. I'm also going to lube up my ring tool. So I'll load my piston into it. So I'm just going to load the piston up with a little bit of the skirt protruding through. Might be a little bit hard to see on camera because my hand's in the way. But that's how I finish it up. So the skirt's just protruding through so the skirt can align. I look at my valve reliefs and make sure my intake valves are on the intake side of the block. Drop this on. So these ring compressors can be a little bit tricky because they're like a sleeve. So if the sleeve isn't perfectly like flat on the bottom, the rings can jump out unevenly. So what you do is you just need to get the old trusty claw hammer out and tap this down so the sleeve is now aligned along the top, which means it's aligned on the bottom. So now you just make sure your valve reliefs are dead square. So my intake valve relief is on the intake side and my exhaust is on the side. Because what will happen is the rod can actually catch the counterweight. So if you look down on cylinder 4, you can see if the rod's out of alignment, it can actually hit the counterweight on the way down. So that's aligned. That's nice and tight. So now I'm just going to tap this down. Okay, so once that's just gone beneath the surface, like I said, I'm going to do my trick. I'm going to grab the rod journal with my fingers, push the rod down until the rod journal hits my fingers, and then I'm going to put my fingers around it, grab it and pull it down. So let's do that. Okay, there it is. Piston 1 is down and home. We'll roll him over. So the faces are just going to give them a little bit of a wipe off, get any of that oil that's everywhere out of the way. A bit more on that side. Okay, nice and clean and dry. Get my rod cap. Make sure my tang goes to my tang. Rod cap on. Okay, so that's home. So now I'm just going to back it off. Let's just check thrust quickly. So the rod has thrust. That's good. got to have something. If it's got nothing, you've got problems. So now, I've backed off the bolts now, because what I'm looking to do is actually measure the overall length of the bolt, and then I want to stretch it down. So with the bolt loose in the hole, we put the gauge on. Okay, so that's on the bolt. Now the number doesn't mean anything because we're looking to stretch it down. So we're just going to zero this off. So what I do is I put this on, I move the gauge around, I'll actually remove the gauge, and to confirm that it is grabbing the right spot on the rod bolt, because you've got to sort of feel around for it until it hits, it goes back to 0. So we can confirm that that's now the length of the rod bolt. I'm just going to pull up on this bolt. I don't know where, I'm just going to guess where the stretch should be. So I'm just going to put a bit of tension on that. Let's measure that, see where we're at. Let's see if my body tension wrench can feel the stretch. So the size is 6 thou, according to the book. Find it. That's 8. A bit too much, so I've got to back that off. Might be 6.5. That's it. 6 2/10. That's on the top side of our scale. So you're going to be 6 2/10 from 5 8/10 to 6 8/10. Yep. 6 thou. So that's number 1 rod and piston done. Let's cycle it over, see how she feels. So again, double checking thrust on my rod. Now that is for when the rod grows with temperature, it's going to grow everywhere, so it grows outwards as well. So you don't want it to bind up in the crankshaft. So you make sure that the rods have always got thrust. Because it's an aftermarket rod, they can vary from brand to brand. It's always good to confirm you've got some sort of thrust. Alright. That's it. Looks pretty good.
3 more to go, eh?
3 more to go.
Way under budget.
Alright, so that'd be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for part 6 where Matt actually gets the head on and completes the assembly of this motor. And as always, he teaches us something new. We'd also like to hear your thoughts in the comments, because 800 horsepower is a serious claim and a lot of people just seem to think that it just isn't possible in a little 4AGE. So let us know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.